Assalamu alaikum, peace be upon you. Bismillah, alhamdulillah, salatu wassalamu ala Rasulullah. For those who do believe in God, in a two-part lecture series called Getting to Know God and Considering Attributes of God, we have discussed implications of getting to know God through His names, attributes, and signs. Today we start a new series discussing the concept of God, where we present arguments and evidence for God as the creator and sustainer from philosophical, logical, scientific, and the Quranic perspectives. These arguments will be against those of the atheists or materialists who do not believe in God's existence or have not made up their minds, such as the agnostics. In this series, we do not intend to prove anything, rather present evidence toward proof of God's existence and argue against the atheists' claims and the response to their common questions. Because there's a difference between evidence and proving something, which are often confused with one another, especially in the context of science. With proving, you present a physical evidence of something, like seeing something in the lab under the scope, or experimenting with something to support a claim or theory, whereas evidence is a set of information you gather toward proving something, as detectives do in a crime scene, which could be testimonies, documentations, logical reasoning, observation, analysis of phenomenon and objects, all pointing to a claim or events that either have already occurred or occurring every day. Consequently, as the evidence grows, it strengthens the argument toward the proof. Furthermore, when it comes to proving God's existence, the burden of proof is on the atheist's shoulder to prove God does not exist for two simple reasons. One being, mankind has worshipped God or gods since the beginning of human race, because mankind is wired to worship. It is in man's nature to worship. The question has always been, worshiping whom? Is it the one God who is the creator, or others? In fact, associating others with the one God has been the main point of contention with all prophets of God and their nations, their people. That is, many of these idol worshippers or polytheists believed in one God as the creator, yet worshiped the idols and appealed to them so they could facilitate their needs. That is why if you survey the world population, you will find a vast majority of them worship a deity or deities in some form or fashion. According to Pew Research Center, worldwide, more than 8 in 10 people identify with a religious group. A comprehensive demographic study of more than 230 countries and territories conducted by the Pew Research Center's Forum on Religion and Public Life estimates that there are 5.8 billion religiously affiliated adults and children around the globe, representing 84% of the 2010 world population of 6.9 billion. Just in the US, in 2022, Gallup found 81% of Americans expressing belief when asked the simple question of, do you believe in God? Another survey by Pew Research, published on December 7, 2023, titled Spiritual Beliefs, showed 88% of Americans surveyed believed in God as described in the Bible or in some other higher power or spiritual force. Same survey revealed 81% of the surveyors believed there is something spiritual beyond the natural world, even if we cannot see it, and believed there are some things that science cannot possibly explain. Therefore, worshipping a deity has always been part of human belief system, whereas the atheism or materialism is a new ideology. And while its history traces its origin in ancient Greece and Indian philosophy, and while there have always been people who did not believe in God, atheism did not emerge as an overt and avowed belief system until late in the Enlightenment. In the 16th century, the age of Enlightenment, atheistic thought re-emerged in Europe. The term atheism was first used in late 18th century Europe to describe a belief in disbelief in the Abrahamic God. The second reason for burden of proof on the atheist is that there is preponderance of evidence for existence of the Creator than not, some of which we will discuss in this series. In fact, as far as I have seen and known, and we will present a few in this series, there is no convincing evidence presented by the materialist or atheist in order to prove God does not exist. Many atheists I have spoken with are not certain about the so-called evidence they have presented. Many have concluded God does not exist, not based on solid evidence, rather based on conclusions of others for which there are no basis. Some with non-scientific, non-analytical conclusions, such as, for example, they say, look at what's happening in the world, all the injustice, therefore there must not be a God, which we will address in this series later. Then there are those among them who think they have the evidence, which they try to present, but again, they too run into problems once their so-called evidence is analyzed and picked apart. In other words, as you will see, their claim that God does not exist raises more questions and creates more problems for which they do not have answers and solutions. As such, I believe, due to longevity or historical belief precedence, since the beginning of human race, man has believed and worshipped, plus the believer majority in population even today, plus the preponderance of evidence for existence of God than not, the burden of proof that God does not exist is on the atheists and materialists, not the believers, as they are denying a belief that already prevalently exists. As for the agnostics, I would say they have put their lives on limbo. At least with atheists and materialists, they know what to think or claim. However, with agnostics, not knowing either way, they have absolved themselves of any responsibility, and only they can decide, hopefully, after hearing our arguments. Another point regarding the unbelievers, whatever camp they may be from, there are a few things about most of them you will notice once you get into debates with them. One is that they will always hunt for probability and bring it as a part of an argument, even if there is a 0.0000001% chance of it occurring in their mind. Similarly, they will discount or completely ignore the obvious or the highest probability of occurrences, make an exception as a general rule, or what there is than not, and vice versa. They tend to view things through very narrow, non-analytical lens, even though some tend to project themselves otherwise. Another point about them is that when a question or a doubt comes up in their mind, one that they cannot decide or find the answer for, they immediately dismiss what they already know about it or the obvious facts about it, dismissing them completely, proceeding to assume all the knowns in that regard must have been wrong. In this lecture series, we will discuss the logical, philosophical, scientific, and scriptural evidence for existence of God, along with their claims on specifics and then our response to those claims. In a segment, we will respond to some of their well-known leaders, such as Richard Dawkins, who has written several books on the topic. This lecture series is addressed not only to the atheists and materialists who are open and fair-minded in hopes of their reconsideration, especially those who are willing to listen to analysis of what they have been told or what they have read or known about atheism, but also it is for the believers to reinforce what they believe to be the truth by providing additional evidence and analysis, especially to some of the young adults among the believers who live in societies or circles that are secular and promote strong secular belief in absence of faith, and where atheism is more prevalent, especially in circles where traditional beliefs are considered things of the past, invalidated by the science or incompatible with the modern outlook. Circles like academia, for example, where while there are students and professors who are believers, the culture is agnostic. As such, there is a certain tendency to view having faith and practicing it as manifestation of intellectual inconsistency, emotional weakness, or lack of cultural sophistication. In this book, in his book, The Evidence, God, the Evidence, Patrick Glenn, as an ex-atheist professor, says, "The day I believe is soon coming when skepticism, unbelief, is going to be a very minority position, not just among the populace at large, but even among intellectuals. What happened to me, the rediscovery of spiritual, is happening to others. The reason lies in a series of dramatic new developments in science, medicine, and other fields that have radically transformed the old existence of God debate. Essentially, over the past 20 years, a significant body of evidence has emerged, shattering the foundations of the long dominant modern secular worldview. The new discoveries seem to me add up to a powerful, indeed, but incontestable case for what once was a completely debatable matter of faith: the existence of soul, afterlife, and God." Before we start, we first need to understand human psyche and stages of human consciousness development, because throughout this series we will refer to them. The reason being, not everyone acknowledges and completes all stages. It is important to understand these stages because they show the difference in human psyche between those who are spiritual and those who are not, which helps us understand how people began to believe what they believe. What are these stages? At the very beginning, human consciousness starts with man's awareness of himself and his sensory. That is, we sense things through our senses like sight, hearing, touching, etc. Even a child has these senses and can feel himself or herself and show reaction when touching heat, cold, or when poked by a needle. There are some among the philosophers and scientists who subscribe to this stage and think if you cannot touch it, see it, or experiment it in the lab, or see it through the microscope or telescope, it does not exist. Everything else is human's imagination. It is as if they have set aside the mind and the heart. They claim it is our senses that are in touch with reality around us. But the mind makes guesses or imagines things. And don't even mention the heart. Heart does not mean a thing. The argument against such thinkers is that senses make mistake. In a desert, one might think he sees water, which turns out to be a mirage. When you look down from a tall building and see the cars on the street below, they seem so small, less than the size of your finger. Yet, your intellect says that is not real, and those cars are far bigger. Every human, even animals, experience this sensory stage, and it is a prerequisite for the second stage, which is the intellectual, aqli stage. Many people do acknowledge this stage and experience it. The reason for acknowledging this stage is that there are many things our senses do not detect, yet we know they exist. Or we use our intellect to conclude certain facts, yet cannot be proven by our senses, or our senses could mislead. There are many cases where our senses are unable to detect anything, but our mind discovers them. Like, for example, a doctor does not sense his patient's pain, does not feel it or see it even, but from traces or effects of patient's pain and illness, he discovers the patient suffers from an infection or a virus or a disease. Often he may not even see the patient and make diagnosis just by looking at her blood test. Based on his discovery, he then addresses the issue through medication. Thus, the intellect discovers the cause through the effect. Hence, scholars who rely only on physical science and experimentation are unable to respond to such questions posed from the intellectual side. Intellect also is used to extend and prove scientific theories and facts, like, for example, the physical laws that are proven in small quantities or on limited trials in the lab, but extended to all quantities through what we call intellectual reasoning, even though some scientists do not want to admit it, because intellectual reasoning is something they cannot take to the laboratory and see under the microscope. However, they acknowledge it, like laws of gravity exist but cannot be seen. Even intellect itself cannot be seen or touched. Any law of physics, chemistry, or any other field were proven through some limited experimentation or observation. For example, Archimedes' principle says a body at rest in a fluid is acted upon by a force pushing upward called the buoyant force, which is equal to the weight of the fluid that the body displaces. And if the body is completely submerged, the volume of fluid displaced is equal to the volume of the body. Did Archimedes experiment with every object, with every size and weight in existence? Of course not. The intellectual reasoning tells us this principle can be extended to objects he did not experiment due to their commonalities, in this case weight. So, just because something cannot be seen or experimented on does not mean it does not exist. Now, many people stop after these two stages and say there's nothing beyond the sensory and intellect. However, there is the third stage called human consciousness, which is completed through one's heart, qalb, and soul. And by heart, we do not really mean the fleshy pump behind our chest either. This is the highest stage, and while it requires the two earlier stages, sensory and intellect, it brings about or adds a different reality called consciousness. This is what makes me, me, and makes you, you. While our physical body goes through constant changes, I do not have the hand or skin or hair I had when I was born, but I'm still the same person I was when I was born. It is the my when I say my hand, my feet. Consciousness is part of our character, our being, our person, and what the believers call soul. It feels things that our senses might not. Feeling or sensations like love, hate, anger, happiness, remorse, all come from our consciousness. In extreme cases, very extreme cases, when someone is depressed or happy or angry, it even shows up in their expression or in their faces. Can you physically see what any feeling actually looks like? No, but we know they exist. While our physical body can be seen and measured in weight and height, our soul, our consciousness cannot. Can you measure how long or how much weight a mother's love is to her baby as she looks upon the baby while feeding her? This is where the world of intellect stops and cannot explain. Things like affection, mercy, compassion, etc. Atheists and materialists do not complete this stage of human development because they do not believe in it. Although, cannot help but to acknowledge aspects of it. They reject the feelings and understandings that stem from the heart and soul and what feeds them, such as spirituality, and say it is all imagination. Some even say such phenomena are based on chemical reactions in our brain, because this way they can explain the phenomena as a physical phenomenon. An atheist surgeon once said, if I cannot put it under my knife in the laboratory or the operating room, it does not exist. Of course, there are abundant examples in life that argue against such baseless claims. It is true that intellect, aql, is the pinnacle of human's existence and is what differentiates him from animals, but one must acknowledge even intellect can make mistakes, as we witness every day, not to mention as evidence all the opposing opinions of the intellectuals and thinkers. It also begs the question, whose intellect, aql, is the criterion or the standard and the proof, hujjah? My intellect, your intellect, Einstein's intellect, Aristotle's intellect, Prophet's intellect, intellect of a 16-year-old, intellect of a 30-year-old or a 50-year-old or a 90-year-old. Whose intellect is hujjah, whose opinion or reason we must follow or call as criterion, with all the differing opinions among the intellectuals, philosophers, and scientists. We do not discount the fact intellect, aql, can provide proof, but to say it is sufficient is not correct. Intellect is necessary, but not sufficient. However, intellect can take what the senses detect, analyze them, process them, and then make conclusions, rulings, maxims, etc. As the Quran says, قُلْ سِيرُوا فِي الْأَرْضِ فَانْظُرُوا. Travel the land and see, understand, get familiar with the landscape and experiences of others. Then think, process, analyze, conclude, etc. That is why one of the philosophers said the best philosophy today is that we must look at the various results and conclusions that physical science has presented to mankind and see what intellectual conclusions we can reach. Hence, the foundation of intellect is the senses, but intellect can analyze, distinguish between truth and falsehood, and judge for itself. Once we pass this point, we get to the station of heart and soul, where our consciousness, ethics, and inner being come from. This stage is especially important because human being has certain spiritual needs which a dry and rigid intellect cannot provide. Fulfilling such needs will bring peace and tranquility to man's heart and mind. Fulfilling such needs will bring higher feelings and motivations in mankind and elevate him to the higher level, a place one would never get to by just knowing physical science. It's not a 2 times 2 equal to 4 that brings tears of joy to mankind, whereas this is one of the best feelings of being a human, where just by seeing something that is moving or understanding something deep, a human being can have tears of joy or sadness. Not because of a special interest or benefit or material gain, but rather for truth of humanity, where one notices very subtle things in life and reacts with a variety of emotions that come from deep inside, what we call his heart or consciousness. This is why this 3rd stage is very important, which mankind can be without which mankind can be a dry, robotic being. Entering this stage has its reward and joy. This stage is also abode of real morals and ethics, whereas secular or intellectual-based moral is solely based on material cost and benefit analysis, which make morality relative. Meaning, if he sees his benefit is at risk, he can then lie, or when there is a cost or loss involved, then he betrays. However, the true morality that is beyond material cost and benefit comes from this 3rd spiritual and consciousness stage. He will say, if I'm not willing to betray my people, my nation, even if it means losing my position, power, wealth, or even life. The ethic that goes beyond the material benefit and harm is developed in man's heart and conscience. That is where the true truthfulness is demonstrated, when one tells the truth, knowing it will be to his disadvantage. It will be to his detriment, yet he still tells the truth. Otherwise, telling the truth about what I had for lunch does not really demonstrate my truthfulness. Truthful is the one who's telling the truth will have material cost or worse consequences for him, but says, I'm not willing to lie. This is moral system, akhlaq, that is far beyond the secular materialistic morals, which has become a commonplace in the world we're living today. As such, they, including even some believers, often ask, on anything, what's the benefit of doing this? What's in it for me? Or what's the harm of doing this or that? We then ask, is the harm or benefit in this world limited to material things only? What about nobility, honor, altruism, man's elevation, self-sacrifice? Do they count for anything? These are three human development stages: sensory, intellect, and the heart and soul, or consciousness. While the Quran confirms the three stages through verses that speak about our physical senses, such as sight, hearing, and others, it also points out to our intellect, aql, in order to reflect. And then to the third stage, which is the heart, qalb. As it says, إِنَّ فِي ذَلِكَ لَذِكْرَى لِمَنْ كَانَ لَهُ قَلْبٌ. Indeed, in that, the Quran is a reminder for whoever has a heart. By qalb, does the Quran mean the fleshy organ behind our rib cage that pumps blood? Of course not. Even Abu Jahl had this physical heart. Why did he not heed the reminder? It is then clear that by qalb, the Quran is referring to the third stage we have been talking about. It is the godliness that we have interpreted as our heart, our conscience, our feelings, and our sentiments, not this fleshy organ. That being said, there is a connection, which is when he has the presence in heart and conscience and spiritual focus on the Creator, his physical heart is excited as well. When his heart beats faster, as if it's a mirror reflecting his spirituality, or his heart is at peace in difficult times. This is why they usually attribute it to the heart. Therefore, mankind is beyond sensory and intellect. Of course, the question of heart and soul is now something that scientific community more or less has acknowledged. For example, after decades of research on people and their near-death experiences, Dr. Raymond Moody and Paul Perry, in their book called Proof of Life After Death, a groundbreaking book that combines nearly 50 years of afterlife and near-death experiences, the research on people providing proof of the existence of the soul and life after death, in which they offer the answer to humanity's most pressing question: what happens when we die? Moody and co-author Paul Perry revealed that consciousness survives after the death of the body, featuring in-depth case analysis, the case studies, the latest research, and eye-opening interviews with experts. Researchers have shown those who were momentarily, clinically dead had out-of-body experiences as they observed themselves lying on the bed, all of which indicate that our nafs, our soul, has reached two experimental stages within scientific community. Of course, in addition to logical reasons offered by earlier philosophers. The Quranic approach in this case is very unique as well. When disbelievers asked, when we're lost and destroyed, decomposed in the earth, in the ground, how can we then be recreated for resurrection? Generally, the Quranic answer would be, the one who created you once before from nothing can recreate you. However, interestingly, in the context of what we have been talking about, in chapter 32, specifically the Quran answers it this way. Say, the angel of death who has been given charge of you will gather you, take you, then to your Lord you shall be returned. Meaning, you're not going to be lost in the ground. Your person, your being, your soul is not made of earthly material that once put in the ground will be destroyed. Your person, your soul will be taken and preserved until you return to your Lord in the last day. This means there is a bigger part of mankind who will survive because it is not made of physical material, hence will not be lost at the end of man's life in this world, this chapter of life. Of course, the materialists have denied themselves of this third stage in human development. Once we fully understand and acknowledge these three stages of our existence, we have gotten to know ourselves, our nafs. You might say, I can feel myself, be conscious of myself through my senses. For example, if I'm standing before you right now, I feel myself through the fact my body weight on my feet, on the ground due to gravity. So I feel it there. But I do not feel anything behind my ears, for example. However, for one to be conscious of oneself, you don't even need your senses. In order to prove our nafs, our soul, does not require any senses to feel its presence or consciousness, in his book Isharat, Ibn Sina gives an example and says, what if you were placed in outer space where there is no gravity pulling you in any direction, so you're just floating with no pressure on any part of your body, and let's say it is dark and no sounds at all. Under such condition, with no influence whatsoever from outside world or through your senses, you will still be self-aware or conscious of your own presence. You would never lose yourself or be unaware of yourself. Even a person without any limbs will feel his own presence or will be aware of himself. The Quran calls this awareness of our whole being as nafs, translated as oneself or soul. When it says, وَنَفْسٍ وَمَا سَوَّاهَا, and by the soul and he who shaped it. Here, nafs, translated as soul, is the place where one becomes aware of oneself. Now, fate holds man's hand through these three stages as it points out all of them and how to utilize them. The introduction of these three stages was necessary because some people in this world do not complete or acknowledge the second and third stage, while others, like atheists or materialists, do not go beyond the second stage, hence no acknowledgement of heart and soul. Then, when you bring logic, reason, and proof, they either accept it, if they are fair-minded, or reject out of stubbornness, or partially accept and explain it away as physical or chemical reaction in our brains. With this introduction on stages of human psyche development and consciousness, sensory, mind, and heart, we now move on to arguments from several perspectives: logical, intellectual, philosophical, or cosmological, kalami arguments, along with the Quranic and Islamic perspective. Once we present these arguments, we will respond to claims made against them during and after, and we'll try to keep it in simple, non-technical terms as much as possible. As we move along through various debates and arguments in this series, I will include the common relevant questions the atheists or agnostics ask and the response to them as well. We will first start with few of many philosophical arguments that atheists or materialists have not been able to deny. Number one, origin and beginning. When discussing the concept of God, there are those who want to know about the beginning. And the believers claim that the universe did not exist and came to be later, and since nothing cannot create anything, then there must be a creator. First, they want the answer to the question, did the universe have a beginning or not? Is it new or is it eternal? To approach this, we need to involve the phenomena called time, or dahr, as the Quran calls it. Meaning, there was a time in which this universe did not exist, and then a time when it was created or existed. Let's make this simple. We ask the materialist, how long do you think the universe has lived or existed? He's either going to limit it in age or not. Let's say he responds by giving us a number. For example, this universe has been around for 50 million years. We can then add 1 to this number and say that means 51 million years ago, the universe must not have existed. If he says 500 million years, we can then say 501 million years ago, it must not have existed. Therefore, in order for us not be able to add any number, he is forced to give us a number upon which we cannot add 1 and say at x plus 1 in time it must not have existed. Let's say he then quotes infinity. That is, the age of the universe is infinity, meaning it has always existed. In other words, he will say this universe has a life of or existence equal to the highest number, which is infinity. When he says that, we can then ask, wait a minute, isn't this universe moving forward? And every second or every day or month or year adds to its life? And then next year on top of the following year and so on? Therefore, this universe has not reached the highest number for its life, because as it moves forward, time is adding years to its life. So then it has not reached infinite years, as you quoted, which is the highest number for its life. If you can add a number to infinity, then it's not infinity anymore. The conclusion here is that the universe's life is finite, not infinite, meaning it started at some point, it had a beginning point to which life years are being added. If it had reached the highest number, it would stop and could not get any older. However, we are witnessing its age is increasing as we go forward. Hence, its life or age is finite, to which it is being added. This is something theories like Big Bang have not been able to reject. Imagine a line in your mind. If you say this line is infinite in length, after that statement you cannot say there is another line ahead of it, because in order for the second line to be ahead of the first line, then the first line must be finite. Thus, having a beginning at the point, you can say, at that point, the second line is ahead of it. If you keep the first line infinite, then the second line has no place ahead of it. As long as the universe's life is increasing year by year, then its life is finite and does have a beginning. One might say this is a discussion about time, which is a conceptual reality within our minds. True. But we say time is a result of continuous changes, motion, or events. It is the events that create the concept of time in our minds and conscious. So then we must turn our attention to events and say, if infinite number of events had occurred in the universe and the universe was without a beginning, the new events could not have occurred because the highest number of events had already occurred. But because the new events keep occurring in the universe, we conclude the age and the number of events is limited or finite and continuously changing. All of which show that the life of universe is not infinite. The universe having a beginning has been pretty much confirmed by scientific theories as well. After establishing the beginning of the universe, the materialists ask, why didn't God create the universe before or earlier than when he did? The answer is before, quote unquote, has a time connotation. Anything that has a beginning and is in motion comes along with time. Time is an element of this world. It started with the beginning of this world. If the world did not exist, time would not exist. So before or after is component of time. Before the world, there was nothingness, Adam, not time. Therefore, when God created or put in motion the universe, time began. Otherwise, God Almighty himself is outside of his creation, including dimensions such as space, time, and matter. Time itself is a creation and an element of this universe, concurrent with it as discussed. We will discuss time more in the next argument for original cause. By the way, materialists like to go back to the beginning and find out how everything began, which is fine. And the Quran talks about origination and the beginning of creation, but also says you don't even need to do that. Just look at yourself, your immediate surrounding, and the ecosystem, which is full of clues and signs. Plus, interestingly, every day that science advances, we discover more and more of these secrets and signs within nature, which bring us steps closer to the conclusion that the universe has a blueprint. We will talk about these scientific aspects later. The Quran invites us to reflect on present and what we see around us, the things and beings who are constantly created, then constant changes and the eventual replacement by the new. Behind all of which, there is knowledge, purpose, and wisdom. Number 2, original cause. We now discuss if the universe has a beginning, how was it created? Kalam cosmological argument says, everything that begins to exist has a cause. The universe began to exist, therefore the universe has a cause. This argument is relative to the time discussion in number 1. The Kalam cosmological argument is a modern formulation of the cosmological argument for the existence of God. It is named after Kalam, the medieval Islamic scholarship, from which many of its key ideas are originated. The argument's central thesis is traced to Muslim scholars and philosophers such as Al-Ghazali, Ibn Rushd, Averroes, and Ibn Sina, and later on Thomas Aquinas. The Kalam cosmological argument is a deductive argument. Therefore, if its premises are true, the conclusion follows necessarily. It says everything that begins to exist has a cause. The universe began to exist, therefore, the universe has a cause. These ideas were revitalized for modern discourse by philosopher and theologian William Lane Craig, who was principally responsible for revitalizing these ideas for modern academic discourse, and that was done through his book, The Kalam Cosmological Argument, 1979, as well as other publications. William Craig said, if the universe has a cause, then an uncaused creator of the universe exists, whom without the universe is beginningless, changeless, immaterial, timeless, spaceless, and enormously powerful. Therefore, an uncaused personal creator of the universe exists, who without the universe is beginningless, changeless, immaterial, timeless, spaceless, and enormously powerful. For scientific evidence of the finitude of the past, Craig refers to the Bordy-Goth-Welkin theorem, which posits a past boundary to cosmic inflation and the general consensus on the standard model of cosmology, which refers to the origin of the universe in the Big Bang. Craig, Sinclair, 2009, pages 193 through 194. And then there's Craig Helg, Cosmology and Controversy, the historical development of two theories of the universe, Princeton, New Jersey, Princeton University Press, page 319. And then Reinbach, Bruce, Cosmological Argument, the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy. So, now, let's put it in a simple term. When we see the order, precise laws and systems within ourselves and throughout the universe, they lead us to three options. First one, the universe came from nothing. Human experience shows us that something that has beginning does not simply come out of nothing. Number two, the universe created itself. This defies logic, as something cannot do anything before it existed. Number three, the universe was created with precise laws and for purpose. This is the only rational explanation. The Quran puts it in a simple question as well in chapter 52. Were they created of nothing, or were they themselves the creators? By the way, the universe was not just created, but also originated by the original cause, who is God Almighty. As the Quran confirms, بديع السماوات والأرض وإذا قضى أمرا فإنما يقول له كن فيكون. The originator of the heavens and the earth, when he decrees a thing, he only says be, and it is. In fact, we can simplify this. Any being or phenomena that is in the effect category, time is prior to it or precedes it, because there was a time it did not exist, then there was a cause for it to appear. Time existed before I was born, so there was a time that I did not exist yet. So then there must be a cause that made me appear. However, for the creator of the universe, who is also creator of time, we cannot say there was a time that he did not exist. He existed prior to existence or creation of time. Or shall we say, time started with God's creation of universe. Thus, there was no period in time during which he did not exist. Therefore, the question of where did he come from, where was he before the universe, who created him, all are illogical. Again, time is the result of motion. That is, when the universe was put in motion, time started. That is, motion and events within stars, galaxies, Earth's motion, or creation of day and night, seasons, months, years, etc. Time stops when there is absolutely no motion, because one moment then becomes the same as another moment. Or better put, there are no moments when there is no motion. By the way, the concept of time is an aqli, or product of mind, with which we measure motion, which is part of our physical world. Thus, the concept of time does not enter into discussion when we're considering the concept of God as to his existence, or where and when he was before the creation of universe. A logical philosopher will consider this exception to the general rule when discussing the creator and time, as he considers physical causes and effects, which are all post-time. Incidentally, we need to make a distinction when discussing concept of cause and effect, which is every phenomena has a cause that has affected it. Not everything has a cause. We will stop at this point and continue with additional arguments in part 2 of this series next time, inshallah. Assalamu ala man ittaba'a al-huda.